Hi, I am Akash. I intend to make a video which talks about economics. Basically, to give you an insight about economics. Because sometimes confusions or call it even misnomers or misinformation about economics is so high that we intend to consider what is right and wrong and what is wrong about it. That is right. So the idea is pretty much simple. I introduce a topic to all of you which is called as the 10 principles of economics. 10 principles of economics are a guiding light, or in simple terms, a basic introduction to knowing economics better. The reason I say they are principles which help you to know economics better is firstly the simplicity. Second, the lucidity with which Yergeri Mankiw has defined it is actually very interesting. Third, what is also very interesting is the fact that the way he has gone forward to conceptualize each idea and let you know how different ways in which individuals, markets, or the economy as a whole works. So these principles are an interesting way to look at economics. Now, whenever anyone talks about economics, they have to understand two simple words: scarcity and choice. Why scarcity and choice? Because let's understand a very simple idea. There are unlimited wants, but there are limited resources. And economics is here to make life simple for you. Because once you learn to optimize your decision, you make a better choice. So economics is not going to help you to make more money, but at least help you to make better decisions with your money. It might not go forward and tell you what you eat, but actually help you to make a decision what you should eat. So when we talk about scarcity, the scarcity is in the economy or in the market regularly. The idea is to understand that scarcity, make a choice which does not decrease the human satisfaction from the consumption of it. So the whole idea is to efficiently utilize our resources and work across accordingly. Therefore, when we start understanding these 10 principles are divided into three major groupings. The first group starts with the first principle, which is people face trade offs. Whenever we talk about trade offs, we are choosing one over another because there is nothing called as free lunch in this world. Like, for a simple example, the classic problem in economics is guns and butter. When a country decides to make guns, they're forgiving butter, and when they are making butter, they're forgiving guns. The choice that you make will decide whether the country will have guns or whether the country will have butter. Now, read guns as capital goods, butter as consumer goods. You will understand that every country has to make that choice of what to produce and what not to produce. Similarly, when you decide to produce something and not produce another thing, what we come across is the idea of opportunity cost. Why opportunity cost? Because when we have decided to produce guns, we are foregoing butter. So the opportunity cost of producing guns is butter. Or when we are producing guns and not butter, the opportunity cost of producing butter is actually guns. And this is a common problem that all of us have. How do you make that decision? That is more important. Therefore, we expect people to be rational. Rational how? Economics talks of something what is called as Homo economicus, meaning the rational human being. Why the rational human being? Because one should be able to identify whether the benefits are more or the cost is associated more. And therefore, we come down to the concept of marginal. Whether if the marginal cost is more to marginal benefit, what should I do? And if the marginal cost is less to marginal benefit, what one should do? So always weigh in your benefits while to your cost while making any choice. So very simply, if I study for 1 more hour, will I get more marks? If I play for 1 more hour, will I be getting more benefits or will I not be able to do my homework? That's a question that we intend you to understand properly. Similarly, the last principle in the group is people respond to incentives. Now, behaviors are defined by cost and benefits. So, for example, if I want something to be followed up in a given market, I decrease the taxes, I increase the expenditure in that industry, and people will choose it. For a very simple example, if I want my employees to do better, I give them a bonus, and that's how things work. So, the first group that we have is how people make decisions, and we're talking about four major things. We face trade-offs, so there are gains and sacrifices for everything in the economy. There is opportunity cost. When you're choosing something, you're giving up another. Third, we have to make our decisions rationally, and we have to look at the marginal changes that happen. Fourth, every time people respond to incentives, they are basically responding to the cost and benefits. So this is how we try to understand the impact of how people make decisions on an economy. So rationality is so important that we need to understand how markets work. And therefore, we move to the second section. The second section begins with a very simple idea. Trade can make everyone better off because what I can produce well, I should sell it. What I don't produce well and the cost is higher, I should buy it if it is coming cheaper. And that's how we say playing out to your positives or playing on to your strengths. And this is why in the world we see trade functioning. And to allow that trade to happen, we need a good markets. Like let's take a very simple example. We've had Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and everyone else wanting to come down to India. Why? Because they knew India is a good market. But today, when India is a well-connected market, we are able to sell everywhere across the world. That's the difference. So we need our markets to work as those power centers or even as a connecting dots so that the buyers and sellers can come together. And when we talk about markets, we talk about people and so on and so forth. We need our government. The reason meaning sometimes it is difficult for markets to correct themselves. Sometimes you need the government to play. Like let's take pollution. I can't get the pollution decreased in the market so easily. So what do? I basically curb it. How? I ensure that the government is able to make some rules on it. If one buyer or one seller is influencing the complete market, let's avoid them. To give more powers to producers, let's give them intellectual property rights. That's when they will have more power in the market. And therefore, the second grouping is more about understanding the market in general, where we say that trade makes everyone better off. Markets are an easier way or a better way to organize economic activity. Government can improve its outcome through a basic interaction or intervention on given times. Here we talk about why there is a market and how market can be insightful way of doing things. We are looking into balancing the imperfect markets and allowing the government to step in wherever required so that the inefficiency in the market could basically be stopped. So when we are trying to move into the third zone, where we would like to understand how the economy as a whole works, the principles are pretty interesting. Why? Because in here now we talk about the fact that how a country or what a country is able to produce would basically be worked on how the economic structure is different. So one major component that we're talking about is productivity. If I like, let's take a very simple example. We started India. When I say we, I mean India started to be identified as a superpower today, but it didn't happen directly. We were a labor-intensive economy. We shifted to capital-intensive economy, and therefore in India you find a very interesting model of capital and labor mixed together. So if our labor was doing good, the markets flourished. If labor was doing bad, the markets didn't do well. And that's how things work. So for example, let's say post 2004, the IT boom basically rises because we were able to provide that much amount of labor, which is skilled labor. And therefore, the important point is how do we go forward and define the standard of living in the country based on its ability to produce goods and services? So, the more the productivity, the more the income, the better the standard of living. Similarly, if I am talking about, let's say, an economy, one of the most interesting factor that sometimes works in the favor and majority of the time is a deterrent to the economic growth is nothing but inflation. Now, please understand a consistent price rise is inflation, and it can happen due to any reason. Either it can be due to excess demand, or it can be due to excess supply, or vice versa. And therefore, there is a need for the government to control prices whenever possible. Like Alfred Marshall basically says that inflation is like alcoholism. Once it starts, it can basically have negative impact, and once you want to stop, you don't know when to stop and how much to stop at. I know it's a very unsocial example, but that's the simile that he tried to talk about. But in simple terms, let's take it in a simple way. When you're trying to go forward and decide to control inflation, you print some notes, you print some currency. But if that currency keeps on, with currency price doesn't rise, and you're supplying more and more currency, you increase inflation. That's a problem. And when I say that's a problem, is because your purchasing power decreases, and that is a deterrent here. So therefore, what we need is the government to understand that your inflation rate and your unemployment rate needs to balance. And the idea is sometimes in a short period of time, it is always good that there is inflation, there is unemployment, wherein you can balance it. But if it goes beyond a limit, then the complete economic policy, the complete monetary and fiscal understanding needs to be reworked, and that's a major challenge. Therefore, when we talk about the economy as a whole section, you have to be very clear that the productivity of a country is defined by the people who are there. So its productivity is going to derive the income is going to derive the standard of living. Money supply and inflation are related, but the government can't print too much money, because too much money means you will have a problem of maintaining the value, and inflation can also be a problem with directly because it will erode the purchasing power of the people. The society in a short run faces this dilemma of how to handle inflation and unemployment, because when one rises, other falls, and one falls, other rises. But the government has to be very careful of the same. The reason why we are talking about these three major domains is because productivity is more important in a country anywhere across the world. Inflation is a monetary phenomena, but it has social, cultural, political, and every other pointer that needs to be identified. And therefore, sometimes it is important that the government takes a holistic perspective, not just look at it, not specifically look at it from one dimension. Even if the concept is preliminarily monetary, the policymakers also have to be very clear that they are able to ensure that inflation and unemployment does not have negative impacts in the long run. So, if this is where we are ending on a pretty pessimistic tone, the understanding of 10 principles should be worked in this way. You have the individual decisions, which basically define the core of any economy. It is the market decisions which are influenced by the individual decisions, and the market functioning will decide what the whole economy would do. It's a very simple way. It is about understanding what humans are doing. It is also understanding how constraints work in an economy. It is about, when we're talking of individual decisions, you're basically talking about how the economy as a whole works. So it's not that they are not interconnected. These principles are trying to create a correlation from the first principle to the last principle, and try to create this interesting web of things where we are just a mere character, but a very influential one, because your actions, your choices, your idea of scarcity, your functionality in the economy is actually going to decide the economic performance of the whole country. And when we are putting uh, such a big responsibility on people, this is the reason why in the earlier part of this video, I said we are expecting people to be homo economicus, meaning rational people undertaking practical decisions. Because you're part of a major policy dynamics. You're part of a very complex economic system that works in it. It's like your human body. If one part doesn't work, all the other parts don't work. There is an interconnection between everything, and we just can't go forward and say, no, this should be done this way. Sometimes the known things also don't work, and sometimes the unknown thing also works. Therefore, as an economic student, you need to understand that every decision has a ripple effect, and your choices are defining the trends at market and at both local and international and national levels. Similarly, there is a cost involved everywhere. You can't say everything is for free. Similarly, there is a long-term impact of all the actions that you do. So therefore, this was an insight. And why I'm saying an insight, because there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of understanding that everyone needs to go through to look at economics, because economics might sound simple, but it's an interesting. puzzle which you will be able to put together when you look at the bigger picture, not just at a smaller one. Thank you.